18 seasons, 4 wives, 18 children, thousands of hours of footage, and the one verdict that none of it was ever designed to produce was delivered not by a court, not by a network, not by a critic or a journalist or a fan community, but by time itself, the only judge whose ruling cannot be appealed. The record on Kody Brown as Truly Brown's father is complete. The evidence is documented. The outcome is visible. And today, in this final video of this series, we read the verdict out loud, for the last time, together, and then we let it stand. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome, and I want you to know that what you're about to hear took 30 topics to build. If you've been here since the beginning, you already know what this moment means. Either way, before we go any further, if this series has given you something real to think about, something honest to feel, please like this video and subscribe to Sister Wives Crew right now. Not for the numbers, for the record. So that Truly Brown's story exists in the fullest possible form for every person who finds it after you. Now, let's finish this. Before the verdict, we need the promise, because Kody Brown made a real one. And that matters more than people realize when they're in a hurry to reach the conclusion. He did not walk into this arrangement cynically. He did not calculate an audience and construct a persona to serve it. When Kody Brown stood in front of cameras for the first time and described what his family was, what it meant, what it was built on, what it was supposed to become, he believed it. Completely. With the specific, unguarded conviction of someone who has not yet discovered the distance between what they intend and what they actually do. The promise was extraordinary, if you think about it without the bitterness that 18 seasons of watching it erode can produce. A family built on more love than convention allows. Children raised in abundance. Not just material abundance, but the abundance of belonging, of being known by multiple adults who were committed to their flourishing. A model of commitment so unusual that it forced everyone who encountered it to interrogate their assumptions about what a family could be, what love could look like, what the word father could contain when stretched beyond its standard dimensions. That was the promise, and it was believed. By Kody, by Mary, Janelle, Christine, and eventually Robin. By every child born into that arrangement who did not choose it, but was given it as their inheritance. And by an audience of millions who tuned in season after season because something in that promise even filtered through the production choices of a reality television network felt like it was reaching for something genuinely human. The promise was real, and I need you to hold that fact fully as we move into what comes next. Because a verdict against a cynical promise is just exposure. It is just the unmasking of something that was always hollow. But a verdict against a genuine promise, a promise believed by the person who made it, broken not through malice, but through the specific and well-documented gap between intention and practice, that is something more painful and more permanent. That is a tragedy. And Truly Brown's story, from the beginning of this series to its final minute, has always been the latter. Now, the evidence. Across 29 topics in this series, a body of documented evidence was assembled, not emotionally assembled analytically, pattern by pattern, season by season, choice by choice. And in this final video, that evidence comes together for the last time into its complete and coherent form. Visit frequencies. This is where the documentation begins, because it is the most concrete and least arguable dimension of the record. The number of times Kody Brown was physically present in Truly Brown's daily life declined season by season in a pattern that was not subtle and was not hidden. It was filmed. It was broadcast. It was available to anyone watching with attention, rather than just with feeling. And what that pattern showed, across the years of Truly's childhood that coincided with the family's most documented deterioration, was not the visit schedule of a man who was losing access to his daughter. It was the visit schedule of a man who was losing interest in maintaining it. Linguistic patterns. The way Kody Brown spoke about his children in confessionals, in group conversations, in the direct address moments that reality television creates as its signature form, contained a tell that this series identified early and documented consistently. Christine's children were described as Christine's children, Janelle's children were described as Janelle's children, and Robin's children were described as his. The possessive pronoun was not distributed equally. It tracked with emotional investment. And Truly Brown, Christine's youngest, born into a family that was already beginning its long fracture, appeared in her father's language as a satellite of her mother, rather than a child of her own. The COVID Protocol. This is the moment in the documented record that this series has returned to most frequently, because it is the moment that most clearly illustrates the mechanism of the failure. The decision about where Kody Brown would be based during the COVID period, whose home, whose bubble, whose children, were not random. It was not simply logistical. It placed him in Robyn's household with a consistency and a duration that removed him from Truly's life during the period of her development when attachment and daily presence matter most. The choice was made. It was documented, and its consequences for Truly's relationship with her father were filmed and broadcast, and remain available on streaming platforms to this day. The grief narrative. Multiple seasons of Sister Wives contained Kody Brown describing in terms of genuine and visible emotional pain the loss of his family, the dissolution of the plural family he had built, the children he was no longer close to, the relationships that had frayed beyond recovery. These monologues were real. The pain in them appeared genuine, and they had one consistent, documented, striking feature across all of them. In the most complete survey of this material that this series conducted, the name Truly Brown did not appear. He grieved his family in the aggregate. He grieved the idea of what he had lost. He did not, in the public record that this series examined, grieve her specifically, by name, as the individual child whose individual childhood had passed without him in it the way she needed him to be, the Wednesday that never came. For those who have followed this series from the beginning, this phrase needs no explanation. For those arriving here for the first time, there was a specific commitment, documented in the broadcast record, about a regular scheduled presence in Truly's life. A day, a frequency, a promise made in the language of a father who intended to show up. The documentation of what followed that commitment is part of the record, and the record is the verdict, the archive she cannot remove. This is the dimension of Truly Brown's situation that this series has identified as perhaps the most quietly significant. Everything that was filmed, every background glance, every quietly confused expression, every moment of a child processing something she was not equipped to name, exists on streaming platforms, generating revenue available to anyone with a subscription. Truly Brown will grow up, and has grown up, in a world where her childhood is content, where her confusion is entertainment, where her resilience is, without her consent and without compensation structured to serve her interests, someone else's product. That archive is permanent, and it is still running. Now the pivot. Not Christine leaving, not the legal divorce proceedings, not any single dramatic scene that the production team constructed as a season climax. The most important moment in Sister Wives history was never aired. It cannot be aired because it happened entirely in one person's interior. Without cameras, without witnesses, without a confessional booth or a network executive deciding whether it served the season's narrative arc. It happened in Truly Brown's interior. The specific, private, undramatic moment when she stopped structuring her emotional life around a father who was not reliably there and started building it on what was actually present. On Christine. On her siblings. On the extended family that her mother's choices and her mother's values and eventually her mother's new marriage made available to her. On herself, which is the foundation that children build when they have to, and which, when built well, becomes the strongest thing a person carries. That pivot happened. The evidence of it is visible in how Truly appears in the later seasons. The shift in her affect, the specific quality of her presence, the way she occupies space in scenes that include her father versus scenes that do not. This series has noted those observations carefully, with the caveat that reading a child's emotional interior from broadcast footage is an imprecise and humbling exercise. But the shift is there. It is documented. And it represents the moment the verdict was rendered in the only court that ultimately matters. Not ours, hers. Here is the performance ledger, balanced for the last time. On one side, the confessionals, the declarations, the speeches about sacrifice and love and what a father would do for his children. "I would die for my children," is a phrase, or variations of it, that appears in the Kody Brown broadcast record with the regularity of a recurring motif. The performances of extraordinary fatherhood, delivered with apparent sincerity, to cameras that were always rolling and audiences that were always watching. On the other side, the visit logs, the documented presences and absences, the specific choices made in the specific moments when the cameras were off, and the only audience was a child who needed him to show up and was paying attention the way children always pay attention to the things adults think they are not noticing, to whether he did. The gap between those two sides of the ledger is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of record. It does not require another season of Sister Wives to clarify, or another confessional to contextualize, or another reunion special to give Kody Brown the opportunity to reframe it in language that he finds more livable. The ledger is balanced. The gap is visible. And naming it, clearly and without theatrical embellishment, is the entire purpose of this final video. Kody Brown performed extraordinary fatherhood with remarkable consistency, and he practiced ordinary fatherhood with remarkable inconsistency. That sentence is the verdict in its simplest form. Everything else in this series has been the documentation that supports it. Now we arrive at the part of this verdict that no amount of image management, no carefully worded confessional, no theological reframing, and no future reunion narrative can alter. The part that belongs entirely to history, which does not negotiate and does not accept edits submitted after the deadline. Kody Brown came into the story with a very specific obsession. Not with his wives, though he declared love for them repeatedly, and in the early seasons visibly. Not with his children, though he described them as his greatest accomplishment and his most sacred responsibility. His deepest, most consistent, most driving obsession across 18 seasons of documented life was legacy. What he would leave behind, how he would be remembered, what the Brown name would mean when the cameras were finally off and the generational story he was building had time to reveal its full shape. He talked about it in the language of a man who had thought about it seriously. Legacy as a spiritual concept. Legacy as a family architecture. Legacy as the thing that justified every difficult choice, every controversial arrangement, every sacrifice demanded of the women and children in his orbit. The plural family was not just a lifestyle. In Kody Brown's articulation of it, it was a contribution to human history, a model, a demonstration of something larger than any one family's comfort or convenience or individual emotional needs. He wanted to be remembered for what he built. Here is what history will actually remember him for. A daughter named Truly, who was given a name that turned out to be the most ironic and the most accurate word in this entire 18-season story, who grew up in the specific absence that her father's documented choices created, who watched her mother leave and watched her father stay, and understood, in the way that children understand things before they have the language to say them, that presence and location are not the same thing, who then, and this is the part that Kody Brown's legacy narrative did not account for, built something. From what she was given, from what she was not given, from the specific material that her specific childhood, in all its complexity and all its cost, left available to her. He wanted to be remembered for what he built. He will be remembered for what she built from what he broke. That is not a tragedy for Truly. She is not a tragedy. She is not a cautionary tale. She is not a symbol or a vessel for other people's feelings about fathers and daughters and the promises that adults make to children they did not ask to be born. She is a person, a specific, documented, observable person who has shown, season by season, appearance by appearance, in the small, visible moments that cameras catch when they are pointed at children who do not yet know how to perform for them, a quality of interior resilience that this series has consistently described as the most significant thing in the entire Brown family story. His legacy, in the end, is her name. And her name was always the most honest word in this family's entire vocabulary. Truly, not the plural family model, not the television franchise, not the theological framework that he defended with the specific, exhausting energy of a man who needs his choices to mean more than choices. Not the memoir, not the speaking engagements, not the confessionals delivered to cameras that are now part of a streaming archive generating quarterly revenue for a network that has never, to this series' knowledge, issued a public statement about the welfare of the children it filmed deteriorating in real time. Truly, that is the legacy, and it is more permanent and more complete than anything he planned. Now the betrayal. And I want to be precise here, because this is the dimension of Truly Brown's story that this series finds most difficult to sit with, not because it is the most emotionally dramatic, but because it is the most structurally permanent. The betrayal is not personal. It is not Kody. It is not any one decision made by any one person in this family that can be apologized for, worked through, or resolved in a reunion episode that the network schedules for maximum viewership. The betrayal is institutional. It is architectural. It is built into the specific mechanism of how reality television works and who it ultimately serves. Sister Wives will continue streaming. That is simply true. The algorithms that govern what content gets recommended to new viewers do not have a category for "this family's children did not consent to this in any meaningful sense and are now adults who might prefer their childhoods not be algorithmically surfaced to strangers." The algorithm has one category: engagement. And Sister Wives, whatever else it is, generates engagement with the reliable consistency of content that lets people feel things about other people's lives without the cost of being in those lives. New viewers will find this show. They will start from season 1. They will watch Truly Brown be born. They will watch her grow. They will watch her confusion and her resilience and her quietly enormous capacity for love in a family that was not always structured to receive it properly. They will feel real things, genuine things, the specific feelings that good documentary storytelling produces in attentive audiences. And the network will collect the revenue that those feelings generate, quarterly, automatically, without a statement, without a welfare check, without any mechanism that routes any portion of that ongoing revenue to the person whose childhood is the product. That is the betrayal without an end date. It is the one that does not resolve when Kody Brown apologizes, or doesn't. It is the one that does not resolve when Truly Brown builds a complete and private and flourishing adult life away from all of this, which this series believes she will, and which we will address directly in a few minutes. It continues regardless of what happens to any individual in this story, because it is not about individuals. It is about a system that was built to extract value from families who agreed in the full sincerity and the incomplete understanding of people who had never done this before to open their lives to cameras, without the full knowledge of what that agreement would cost the children who never agreed at all. The children who never agreed at all. That phrase is the whole argument for the legislative advocacy that this series described in an earlier topic. It is the reason that "I signed the contracts" and "the parents consented" are insufficient answers to the question of what the reality television industry owes the children it has filmed growing up for 30 years. Truly Brown did not sign a contract. She was born into one. And the archive of her childhood runs on servers that will outlast everyone currently arguing about whether Kody Brown deserves forgiveness. That deserves to be named in the final verdict. As the institutional dimension of what was done to a child who was never asked, now the validation, and this one is entirely earned. The Sister Wives fandom has been called many things over the years: obsessive, parasocial, too invested, too critical, unable to separate entertainment from reality, unable to give people the grace they would want for themselves, unable to recognize that what they were watching was a produced, edited, narratively shaped version of a family's life, and not the family's life itself. Here is what the Sister Wives fandom actually was, across the years that this series examined. Right? Consistently. Early, with the specific quality of attention that comes from caring about something more than the people producing it required. The visit patterns of the fandom observed the decline in documented presence before any formal analysis named it. The linguistic tells the possessive pronoun distribution. The way Kody spoke about whose children were whose, the fandom noticed it in comment sections years before this series built a framework around it. The COVID protocol, the fandom understood its implications for the children in the non-Robin households before the seasons that dramatized those implications had aired. The Truly erasure, the absence of her name in the grief narratives, the backgrounding of her emotional experience in seasons that should have centered it. The fandom identified it and named it and refused to let it go unnoticed. Christine's children are thriving. The fandom predicted it, specifically, early, and with the confidence of people who had been watching Christine Allred parent for enough seasons to know what her children were going to have access to when she finally made the decision that she made. And they were right. The thriving is documented and visible and ongoing, and exactly what the fandom said it would be. David Woolley's significance. The fandom understood it before the broader discourse caught up. Not as a romantic story about Christine finding love, though it is that, and it is genuinely moving as that. as an intervention in Truly Brown's developmental story, as the specific arrival of a consistent, present, demonstrated adult male figure in a child's life, at the moment when such a figure's presence could still shape what she would come to understand love and reliability to look like. The fandom got there first, with the care and the analytical precision of people who were paying attention when it mattered. This series was built on your observations. The 29 topics that preceded this one were possible because a community of people had been watching carefully and noting specifically, and refusing to let the production's preferred narrative be the only narrative available. The verdict in this final video stands on your foundation, and Truly Brown's story was told completely in this series because you were paying attention when it was happening. Thank you. That is not a performance. It is the most accurate thing this series has said. Now, the final prediction. And I want to be careful here because Truly Brown is a real person, and predictions about real people's futures carry a responsibility that this series takes seriously. This is not a fantasy. It is not a projection of what would make the audience feel resolved. It is a specific, evidence-based prediction about what the documented qualities of one specific child suggest about the adult she is becoming and the person she will be. At 25, she will be building something. It will not look finished yet, because the things worth building never do at 25. But it will be intentional. It will be assembled with the specific, quiet deliberateness of someone who knows what things cost, because she has paid for things she should have received for free, and who therefore does not waste the resources she has fought to accumulate. A life, a relationship, a sense of self that does not require external validation to remain stable. Something real, built from real material, by someone who learned early that the difference between what people promise and what they actually do is the most important information available about any situation. At 35, she will be the person in every room who sees the quiet ones. This is the prediction this series holds with the most confidence, because it is the most directly supported by what has been documented. The children who were the quiet ones, who sat in the background of scenes designed around other people's drama, who processed in silence what they were not equipped to articulate, who developed the specific interior richness that comes from spending years observing more than performing, those children become the adults who notice, who asks the child in the background of the party if they are okay, and mean it, and wait for the real answer rather than the performed one, who knows the difference between fine as a deflection and fine as a truth because they have lived both extensively and can hear the distinction in a single syllable. Truly Brown will be that person. She already is, in the glimpses the broadcast record provides. The quality of attention she brings to other people's distress, even in the heavily edited and narratively managed context of a reality television production, is visible and specific, and not something that is performed. It is practiced. It is hers. At 45, she will look back at her childhood and feel something that cannot be reduced to either gratitude or grief, because it will be both, fully, simultaneously, in the way that only genuine emotional maturity makes possible. Grief for what her childhood cost, for the specific things a child should receive that she had to build substitutes for Wednesday that should have been reliable and wasn't, for the name that should have appeared in the grief narrative and didn't, for the ordinary, undramatic, consistent presence that is the actual substance of what fathers give children when they show up. Not the speeches, not the declarations, not the performed love that looks good on camera, just the showing up, repeatedly, without fanfare, because a child is there and needs to know that their existence registers. She will grieve that. She deserves to. It was real, and it cost something real. And she will also, at 45, with the specific clarity that comes from having metabolized something fully rather than just surviving it, understand what her childhood built in her. Resilience. The observational capacity, the ability to locate genuine love and reliable presence and respond to them with the full openness of someone who knows their value, because she spent enough time without them to understand exactly what they are. The specific wisdom that cannot be acquired any other way, only through the experience of needing something, not having it, building the capacity to survive its absence, and then choosing, deliberately and with full knowledge of what the choice means, to believe in its possibility anyway. She will have arrived at something that most people spend their entire lives approaching, not despite her childhood, through it. Not because the cost was worth it. No child's suffering is a fair price for any wisdom, but because she is truly brown. And truly brown has always done with what she has been given something more than what the giving deserved. She was always the most honest person in every room she occupied, the one whose face, when the cameras caught it at an unguarded angle, told the truth that the produced narrative was working to contain. The one whose name, chosen before anyone knew what it would come to mean, turned out to be the single most accurate word in 18 seasons of a story that struggled, consistently, to locate accuracy in anyone else. Truly. The name was never wrong. It was always the verdict waiting to be read aloud. And now it has been. 30 topics, 1 story. Told as completely as it could be told from the outside of the person living it, with the care that that limitation requires and the honesty that this subject has always demanded. If this series gave you something real, something that changed how you see this story, or how you see children in similar situations, or how you understand the distance between what people perform and what they practice, then I'm asking you for 3 things before you leave this video. First, like this video. Like every video in this series that gave you something worth keeping, not for the algorithm, for the record, so that this series exists in its fullest possible form for every person who finds it after you, for everyone who is going to discover Sister Wives next month, next year, 5 years from now, and who deserves to have this analysis available alongside the broadcast version of the story. Second, subscribe to Sister Wives Crew right now if you have not already. Not because more content about Truly specifically is coming, her story has now been told as completely as this series is able to tell it, but because this channel is committed to telling the stories that reality television produces but does not complete. The stories of the people in the background, the children who did not choose to be filmed, the emotional truths that 18 seasons of produced content can document without ever naming. There are more stories. This channel will tell them with the same care and the same specificity, and the same refusal to let the network's preferred narrative be the only one available. Third, and this is the one that matters more than the other 2 combined, tell one person in your life about Truly Brown today, not about the show, not about Kody or Christine, or the divorce or the plural family drama that the entertainment press has been covering for a decade. About the child, about what her story reveals about what children need, which is not spectacular love, not performed love, not love that sounds extraordinary in a confessional booth. What they need is specific, consistent, ordinary, showing up love, the kind that does not require cameras to be present, the kind that keeps Wednesday. Tell one person about that, because the most consequential thing this series can produce is not a view count or a subscriber number or an algorithmic recommendation that surfaces this content to the right audience at the right moment. It is one more person who walks back into their life and looks at the child in the background of a room and asks genuinely, with the patience to wait for the real answer, if they are okay. Be that person. That is the finale. That is the whole series. That is everything that 30 topics, across however many hours of your time you gave to this, was trying to build toward. Truly Brown did not ask to be content. She did not ask to be a lesson, or a symbol, or the emotional anchor of a stranger's analytical series on a platform that did not exist when she was born. She asked, in the way children ask without words and without strategy, only to be seen, to be named, to matter specifically to the specific people responsible for her specific life. This series saw her, named her, let her matter, in the only way available from this distance, which is imperfect, which is insufficient, which is nonetheless the best that could be done with what was documented and what was owed. The verdict is complete. The record is closed. The name is Truly. And the name was always right. Thank you for watching every single topic. It has been the genuine honor of this channel to tell this story with you. Every one of you who stayed, who commented, who pushed back when pushing back was warranted, who paid attention when it would have been easier not to, you made this series what it is. Now go tell one person. That is all. That is everything. Go!